Mesdames et messieurs, bonsoir et bienvenue à notre émission Forum communautaire. L'émission qui vous promet d'être toujours à l'avant-garde de l'actualité, la politique, l'économie, l'éducation, la science, la santé, la loi et le divertissement. Forum communautaire est une émission télévisée tous les dimanches de 4h30 à 5h30 sur Cuenca Vision, WCEA, chaîne 58, Comcast 729. Notre ambition, c'est d'être vos yeux, vos pieds ainsi que vos oreilles, espérant de partager avec vous le meilleur. Pour vos publicités, questions, commentaires et suggestions, consultez-nous au 617 839 71 91 ou par courrier électronique JEAN-CLAUDE @yahoo.com. D'ores et déjà, nous vous souhaitons une bonne audition. Nous allons passer à une courte pause publicitaire.
Avant-garde. Nous devons toujours à l'avant-garde. Pour ou même qu'à l'avant-garde, consultez Jean-Claude Sanon n'importe qui est dans 617 839 71 91. Toujours à l'avant-garde avec Jean-Claude Sanon, nous offrons tout service immigration avec accident. Nous remplissons toute forme, nous mettons en forme. L'aide pour toute occasion ou circonstance, interprétation médicale légale, caille docteur dans l'hôpital, caille avocat dans le tribunal, sans compter immigration, traduction toute qualité papier, certificat, acte de naissance, de mariage, de décès.
Service de traduction, c'est même joie. L'aide pour demande de visa devant ambassade, discours, notaire public, officier d'état civil pour marier ou.
Real estate, vendre à acheter caille, mettre cérémonie pour toute occasion, c'est Jean-Claude Sanon. Non affilié à un bureau avocat en Haïti qui travaille serré à Archives nationales et tribunal. Service vite passé vent pour jugement acte de naissance tardive, acte de naissance tenant lieu, acte de décès, acte de divorce. Nous fait divorce tout sans qu'on pas besoin de payer ticket pour l'Haïti. Acte d'adoption, acte de mariage, civil ou religieux, extrait acte de naissance et de mariage, rapido presto, bon bagage sans problème devant immigration reconnu par l'État haïtien. Sans faux pas, consultez Avant-garde. Jean-Claude Sanon dans 617 839 71 91.
Nous opérons seulement sur rendez-vous dans le nouveau local, numéro 11 Rexford Street, Mattapan, Mass. It will always be a pleasure, and it has always been a pleasure to be in front of you and to bring to you the bridge. Every time this moment comes, it brings joy to my heart for me to share this moment together with you and for us to have a dialogue with somebody who is doing something very important in our community, somebody who has something to share, somebody who wants to talk about issues that pertain to our livelihood. And this is why we are here on a religious basis. And I want to welcome you with open arms. And my name is Jean-Claude Sanon, the host of The Bridge. But I could never do this all by myself without the assistance of those who have certainly have the similar visions as I do to really educate our community, inform them, and bring about what is important with them. Critical risk theory, this is what he's about to discuss together with us today, and his name is Kevin PETERSON, who's been doing things in this city, has taken so many risks in terms of challenging the fight for this race issue, and today we're going to have a moment together with him. On this note, Brother Dale.
So good to see you again.
All right.
Always glad to be on the show.
It is your topic of heart. It's I mean, this is in your heart, and you've been fighting for it for the longest. And I guess this is what led you to all this philosophy and as well as this all theology, hoping that mankind will change. But it's an issue that is kind of taboo, I would say, because folks are afraid of talking about it. Folks refuse to touch it. And there is no other healing process than discussing it and comes with remedy to solve it. How is it going thus far?
Well, I would agree with you from the outset. Race is a difficult conversation for people to have because it is so laden with the pain of some people who were oppressed, and to a certain extent the pain of those people who were the oppressors. Sometimes we think about race or racism and we think of it only as a one-way street where in this country blacks are the victims of economic and political and social violence. But it is actually a two-way street where whites, who are the oppressors, are also victimized because they lose part of their humanity, part of their insight, part of their integrity, when they practice racism. So as they practice racism on black people in this country, they're also inflicting some pain and some violence on themselves. So we need to always maintain that perspective. And as I've said on this show many times, Boston is one of the most racist cities in the nation. We talked about that.
And who would ever thought of that? Because it also carries the cradle of liberty.
That's right. That's right.
What a controversy.
There's the contradiction, the irony, right? One of the most third segregated cities in the nation, Boston is. We talked about the income disparity in terms of net worth, black families versus white families. If you're a black male, Cape Verdean male, Latino male, you're more likely to die of homicide, murder in this city. You're less likely to be find justice around those cases in the court of law. A black person in the city of Boston lives on average 8 years shorter than whites who may only live.
So we are not being impacted only financially. Health-wise, we are being impacted, and also living expectancy has also been impacted. Let's take this from the top and come down. What is critical race theory? Why is it important? And while others still are passing laws right now to try to control this.
Okay, you stacked them on. You stacked them. Let me start first. Critical race theory is something about which I was leading the conversation on. It is the practice of understanding the racial history in this country and providing an analysis of a legacy or a framework of racism that starts from slavery days and extends into 2022. The title comes from the academy, where some 30 or 40 some years ago, a Professor Derek Bell, who was at Harvard at the time and eventually went over to NYU, New York University, coined the phrase, and by that he meant that critical race theory was an evaluation of historic and structural racism. So it's the way that one would observe the legacy of racism in the country. It has become controversial, this critical race theory, more recently because our white brothers and sisters have been intimidated by critical race theory, intimidated that we teach black history in our public schools.
Why such intimidation? Because I see them going forcefully as far as trying to destroy this not to take place. Why?
Well, I think because whites are prejudiced. Racist whites are afraid about the future, afraid about reflecting on what legacy they come from in terms of the racism that's been practiced, put in place by whites. They don't want that information to come to fore, so they don't want their children, these whites who are anti-critical race theory, they don't want their children to learn in public schools that slavery was a practice that became the economic foundation of this country, and that there should be perhaps some reparations connected to slavery. They don't want their children to know that. They don't want their children to know that the public school systems throughout the history of this nation have been tilted towards white privilege and white advantage. Because if their children know that, or the larger public knows that, then there isn't there won't be a push to redress those issues. So critical race theory is a fancy way of basically saying that this is the history of our country and we need to deal with it. And those who are anti-critical race theory reflect the racist attitudes of mostly whites who feel that we shouldn't address this history and address the contemporary expression of structural and systemic white racism.
Well,
let me add something. This argument around critical race theory is just not theoretical. It's just not up in the air. In 2 states currently, Alabama just 2 weeks ago,
Okay.
and Florida, and Virginia, I should say, 3 states have put in place anti-critical race theory legislation, made it law. So it is illegal in the public school systems in those states to teach in a very, very focused way the history of slavery, for example. I don't want to hear it. I was in Alabama just last week, and I saw the governor, I don't recall her name right now, on TV, just talking about how it was important that we not engage in critical race theory.
So afraid of touching the sins of our fathers.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's how absurdly divided our nation has become when we don't want to address the past in a very balanced way. We find ourselves extremely divided and extremely partisan and unfair to a group of Americans who deserve the respect and the dignity that our history exposes.
Why should we pay attention to this? Why is that important? Why should it be a debate
Critical
among
race theory?
ourselves?
I think it's because if we're going to have a vibrant democracy, if we're going to understand what it means to be a citizen and how we should be acting as citizens from election to election, or even engaging in things simply as being a member of the jury pool, for example, we need to know the full aspects of our history. And I mentioned the jury pool, for example, because in so many instances across the nation, even in 2022, there are juries that are unbalanced in terms of race. Some of that has to do with structural racism. And if we don't have, as Americans, have a clear idea of how unjust and how we've inflicted so much violence on a race of people, on a group of people, blacks in this country, then we don't have the opportunity to remedy it. So it's important to avail ourselves of our full history, our racial history, in order for us to be vigilant to the whole idea of democracy.
You know, this is something that I've often said. From one generation to another, we need to pass on the baton, that's for sure, and we need to continue the struggle, because freedom is not being acquired. You gotta fight for it in order for you to get there. Often I thought it was a shame when I was in high school, and today I found it to be abhorrent, with the fact that they're coming up with a Black History Month. What's that supposed to mean? Is that a consolation to us?
Yeah.
Or is it an insult?
It is an insult. That's the short answer. Because it segregates Black history into the corner of our public consciousness, and it carries a stigma that perhaps Black history is only worth studying for the 28 days of February, the shortest month of the year, by the way.
He was the 31, right?
That's right. That's right. And so it, as I say, it creates a stigma, and it contracts the study of Black history in such a way that any student, high school student going through our public schools in Massachusetts doesn't have the opportunity to avail themselves from the full extent of Black history if only the focus is in 1 month of the year. So I've always felt it was a stigma and unfair in terms of how we teach American history. Black history is integral to American history. There will be no history, there will be no American history without Black history. We just go back to the founding of this nation. Politically, we look at the Constitution, the seminal document, the very document that establishes our political culture. And it talks about blacks as being 3/5 of a human being. Well, there it is, right at the beginning of our nation's history. So it's important that we study and we engage in Black history throughout our public schools, but also throughout our lives. Nothing else could be more important if we are going to develop strong citizens. And I'm adamant about the use of blacks as being recognized as citizens. It's important to say that. And we're going to be strong citizens, and we're going to have to support citizenry by supporting the teaching and the understanding of Black history. We don't arrive at democracy in any full way if we don't do that. We shortchange ourselves.
I was doing the news and I fell on a study that stated the following, that overdose of drug by blacks has increased to be higher than among whites, which was always an accustomed to the white society. But it's becoming a norm, whereas since 2020, we have gone sky high on this. And this is also a racial justice issue that needs to be addressed too as well.
It is. Suicide rates, homicide rates, disproportionate in some ways, or black on black crime, disproportionate to white on white crime in some ways. There are so many indices within our American culture that point to the fact that blacks are disproportionately harmed just through living, just by living in this nation. I ran across an Instagram post not too long ago that was troubling, and it raises a very, very interesting question. The post asked the question, would you rather live 50 years as a black man or 100 years as a white person? And some of my black friends, after some real serious discussion, said they would rather live 50 years as a white person as opposed to 100 years as a black person, because they felt, in real deep reflection, it's horrible to engage one's existence as a black person in this country, and they would rather be white. That's how difficult things are in this nation, and it's not difficult to understand why they would be driven to that conclusion, just based on what you just raised in terms of the suicide rate. The suicide rate, disproportionate suicide rate among blacks, reflects a level of depression, a level of the lack of hope in ways that are not reflected in the larger white society, for example. Something's wrong there, and I think what's wrong there is something that's skewed along the lines of race. Being black has an unfortunate characterization to it. That's too bad.
A very next discussion, which is in the media, they're talking about the two young black females. Whereas if it was for the interventions of the DA, the Mullen school system would have gotten away with murder by discriminating against these girls for their hair being braided. And I am kind of proud with the legislatures who was really taking on this issue and trying to eliminate this whole thing. But why is it getting worse than better?
I'm not sure if it's gotten worse. I think it just hasn't gotten better. I think that instance where two black girls in Malden were made to feel uncomfortable because they wanted to braid their hair, because they wanted to reflect their African ancestry and their African cultural styles. I think that's an attitude that's been consistent throughout the history of this nation, where to be black is to be on the margins, is not to be mainstream. So those people, those teachers, those administrators within that school were suggesting to those young ladies that they were on the margins and that they should come into a white mainstream understanding what beauty looks like. That's tragic, and that's a form of violence that I would suggest is no different from lynching. It's kind of a spiritual lynching in some ways, this kind of lynching of the black culture, and that's very, very serious. So I'm glad that there's been some media attention to it. There is a way that we get a deeper understanding about some of the issues that that blacks are engaging in, some of the issues that white people need to be aware of. There is no typical, or there should be no typical American standard in terms of beauty. Everyone's beautiful, and to denigrate the braids, African braids,
especially being created at the master's image.
That's right.
I just, it's something that's always troubles me when I see folks saying, "Oh, this person is so beautiful," and it's on whose eyes are you?
Yeah, by what standard, right? And we remember the study. I'm sure you do, Jean-Claude, in the 1950s of the young students who were presented black dolls versus white dolls, and they were asked what they preferred.
Yes, sir.
So even at the age of 5, black children, were making very, very serious choices about what they hated and what they didn't. Well, what they liked and what they didn't like, and they didn't like themselves, the color of themselves, as pictured in a black doll. I don't know if we've come that far from even those instances here where black, even within the black culture, black is considered negative. Malcolm X talked a lot about.
Let me tell you something.
Mm-hmm.
I guess these products were not available probably back then, but since they're becoming more available now, you find a lot of blacks who are becoming in denial with themselves.
Yeah.
Bleaching is taking a norm just throughout the African diaspora.
Bleaching skin. Particularly on the continent.
We are enriching the Chinese and the Indian as far as hairstyle is concerned. So all of these things, we are ruining ourselves financially. To enrich other people. So I think black folks need to also come with grips with the fact that this is who we are, a child of God. Yeah. Accept it as it is, and don't let anybody else try to determine who we are and what we should like, and so on and so forth. But let's segue to the refugees issue, which also another critical race theory. If you have noticed what has been happening lately, in comparison with the Afghan and the Haitians, or the Haitians with the Ukrainians, the kind of treatments that these people are receiving, and in terms of we are receiving, and whites throughout the world don't give a damn about what we say, what if we are being not treated properly or anything like this, and they go on and do all that needed to be done for their brothers and sisters, and when it comes to our term, it's a different scope.
Yeah, and it begs the question, or the issue, or the notions that Malcolm X has raised when he was alive, in terms of the presence of the black globally and disproportionate treatment. Across the globe, black people are just not valued as fully human. W.B. Du Bois talked about this. Marcus Garvey talked about this. Toussaint Louverture embodied this. That it is important to acknowledge the full humanity of black people. And Toussaint Louverture went to war about it. Used violence in order to make that point around black freedom and a form of black democracy. So all across the globe, and the issue of immigration across borders across the globe sort of reflects how blacks are treated versus whites, and it's disproportionate. The people who make global policy or decisions are people who don't really take the presence of black authenticity to mind. So even as we struggle in the United States about equality and justice based on race, we see it sort of earmarked across the globe about this issue of white supremacy. This issue of white supremacy is global. It's global.
We can't let this go away. It has to be a topic of discussions very often. What if it's in the living room? What if it's in the schools and everywhere else? Because awareness is going to be one way of solving it. Admitting the wrong is also another way of solving it. And be able to discuss it without being ashamed of it. Not so much ashamed that we want to put it in the back burner, but ashamed of what was done and how do we heal. Because otherwise, if we don't go through that procedure, this nation will never be healing as far as race critical theory is concerned.
That's right. That's right. Critical race theory pushes us to the point, as you opened up the dialogue during this show, it pushes us to the point of dialogue and having a conversation and engaging whites and engaging ourselves around the issue of justice by assessing what our history is, by assessing where we stand in contemporary times with regard to race, and then looking for opportunities to appeal for apology, to talk about apology, to demand apology, and then move on to repair, then eventually move on to a sense of reconciliation. That's the best of the black tradition throughout the diaspora, pushing for full acknowledgement of a black humanity, and also pushing for justice and reconciliation at some point.
I'm going to close with this, and I want you to comment on it. I remember as a child back in Haiti, when we used to look at a dollar sign that says, "In God We Trust." And we were often kind of laughing about it, saying that, is it in the dollar that we trust, or is it in God we trust? Now, forming this together with this whole concept of America is the land of the free, the home of the braves. Certainly we're not talking about us into this picture. But to finalize it, Christianity is being sold throughout the world by American preachers just all over, while they are committing so much atrocity, crimes, invasions, and so on and so forth. So where is Christianity into all of this?
Well, I think the Christianity that that is deeply tied to capitalism is not a Christianity at all, because Jesus wasn't a capitalist. If we had to put any kind of political association to Jesus, the Christ, he was a communist. Not in the political communist sense of the Soviet Union, but he believed in community. He believed that we should hold things in common. If we look at the Bible closely and his relationship with the 12 disciples, for example, they used money as a common asset. The Christianity that's sold, even the Christianity that was sold around during slavery time to the slaves, that kind of justified.
They go into the people's home, take away their land, and leave them with the Bible.
Yeah, that's a false. That's a false Christianity, and it has nothing to do with the pure religion, which is about love, and it's about mutual respect, and about care for others, not the exploitation of others, and definitely not. Our Christianity doesn't make any distinctions, negative ones, around the issue of race.
Well, it should have been certainly be a role model for them to change and repent.
It is.
But unfortunately, that's not how they are using it. It has been a pleasure having Kevin Peterson here in the house with us. We're wrapping up the bridge today, and certainly there will be other future presentations with them on board. We're asking you to stay tuned and please enjoy the moment together while you are on Forum Communautaire, Radio Concorde, MCTV of Boston, and as well as Info Haiti and Camera Mosaic. A pleasure to be here with you.
Soleil levé, bonjour. Est-ce que nous en forme? Est-ce que nous sommes en l'air?
Non, Pam, c'est Rizvi Saint-Iné, directeur, honneur exécutif directeur Soleil levé. Cap invité nous dans bel programme ça nous gagnons dans la cour Randolph avec grandette nous grandette haïtien nous. Pas oublier nous sommes 100% haïtiens, n'a travaillé dans la communauté nous, n'a servi la communauté nous. Nous pas l'inviter ouais tout ça qu'a fait jeudi à dans Soleil levé. Tout ce qu'on va là c'est ça nous fait dans Soleil levé et c'est ça nous fait chaque jour et l'autre avec l'autre activité toujours nous mettons en dedans soleil levé pour grandir nous, pour grandir haïtien nous. Ouais, genre exercice la fête en dedans soleil levé. Exercice ça sont un exercice sur le vitamine B12 et vitamine ça m'cadou depuis grandir yo pas jeune ni yo t'a perdu exercice ça yo senti yo malade pour journée. Deuxièmement, l'autre activité nouvelle nous fait bingo, nous jouer domino, yo jouer cartes, yo fait toute l'autre activité, yo passer beans, yo passer tigandiri qui avec poids, yo fait toute qualité activité en dans soleil. Là au fini, nous servi yo snack yo et nous passer de l'eau, nous bailler au snack. Après ça, ou capable ouais dans kitchen ça cap passer et dans kitchen qu'on a là ouais manger à préparer ouais et staff yo cap préparer là, William et madame regarde cap fait manger et madame maison cap préparer yo fin fait manger, y a ranger, y a clean et là on passer dans nursing qu'on a là ouais et nurse yo, nous gagne nurse yo et monsieur Macula, David et l'autre nurse yo, nurse Berlin, nurse Roselle qui la cap bail bon soin avec grandette nous et comparer service ça avec l'autre nous même n'a travail, n'a bail bon service, n'a bail bon qualité service, bon bagage pour nous faire tout haïtien fier et de tête yo, de yo même avec grandette nous, j'en a servi grandette nous et grandette nous l'aime de ça. Nous pas oublier nous dans période nous là son période qui est très fragile, c'est période Covid-19. Tout moun yo avec face shield, yo gen marché, nous respecter tout principe social ça demande yo, tout guideline yo et alors pour nous capable assurer nous que grandette yo fait ça et vinn et programme nan Jean revenir c'est comme ça retourner. C'est ça que fait nous un petit slogan dedans, nous pas prendre nous pas bail. Service transportation avec un directeur Manuel et l'autre chauffeur qui a frappé la donne. Même Jean ouais dans l'activité et directeur Henri avec un directeur Rudy Coulange qui c'est floor manager qui a voulu monter, Jimmy qui a voulu monter. Adresse nous c'est 61 Pleasant Street, Randolph, Massachusetts 02368. Nous chita là dans Randolph là. Ou carrelez nous tout dans 617 905 0341 ou bien dans 617 932 60 76. Soleil levé c'est pas, c'est pas tout haïtien. Mes amis, nous venons dans soleil levé.